we know how to style an individual component, but turns out most pages tend not to be just one component, right? Usually you have more than one component and you need to lay them out in some way, shape, or form. And we've got a bunch of ways to do that. We've got some of the older tried and true, like margin kind of based layout techniques. We've got things like Flexbox. We've got things like Grid. All of those we will take a tour of today. But let's kind of like, we'll do them in, I guess technically chronological order. Cool. So I think I have another one here called card list, where my card that I just made, this is the only reason we pulled in any framework, the card that I just made, I can use here without having to do it again. And what's the thing that jumps out at us about these cards, if we look at them all together?
They sort of stack on top of each other, and
they're kind of gross, right? Like, I'd like to let them breathe a little bit here. So there's a bunch of tools for this. Like, you can probably think of them in your head already, but let's talk. We'll talk about one of them that you kind of get for free with Tailwind, which is just a little CSS trick. So I'm gonna go as opposed to the website. Let's go into that card list, and you can see as soon as I put away some UI that all we have, right? All card list is a div that happens to have 4 cards in it. And Tailwind gives you some utilities that you could totally write yourself in CSS, but are just kind of like somewhat nice in this sense. So one of the ones that we can use is this space Y. And we'll look at, like, the nice part is you can hover over it and see what it does. Visually, we can see exactly what it does, right? If we hover over the CSS, we can kind of get a slightly better sense where if it's not the last child, put some margin on the bottom, right? Or end in this case. And so that basically applies it. So it's all of them, but this one gets no margin at the bottom, right? And that's just using, like looks a little bit squirrely, but basically it's saying like, for each one where it's not the last child, and there's ways you can do this with stars too, go ahead and add some spacing in between all of them, right? It does, and you can just very quickly and easily, you can guess what space X does, right? Not the company. It does between, if they're horizontally, so if you had a bunch of buttons, you could do space X2 and put some space between each of those buttons. There's also, it has another fun friend, which is going to look a little weird with these cards, but we'll get the point, which is divide Y. And then we have to do divide over here. Perhaps it don't work with the live coded cards, but that's fine. We have examples. So we saw before, there's space X, space Y. It'll add some space in there. Here's the horizontal version with some rando buttons. Effectively, it's a little more complicated these days, but like this would also effectively kind of show us what we're doing as well. Divide just puts a solid color in between each of them. So we've got, the divider, we've got the overall background color for the div, so on and so forth. I have never actually purposely used divide on purpose ever. I use the space all the time. You can change the color of the dividers, but basically it puts like something you can kind of see in between each of them. I've always just used space, but you can mix them up. If you're like, what about Flexbox? Flexbox also works in this case, and we'll look at Flexbox in a second. There are some times where the problem with Flexbox is that it makes everything inside the Flex container a Flex item, which could change things in ways you don't want. A lot of times, this, because it's just adding margins, will get you most of the way there. So this is here if you need it, but if you're like, I'd rather just use Flexbox, I get it. That's cool. You should do that. I do that too. All right, I use kind of both. If I feel like I'm using more than, if I'm just doing it to add some space, I'll use this tool. If I feel like I'm also doing a bunch of other Flex stuff, no harm in using Flexbox. But this is, if you find yourself like, I wanted to use Flexbox, but now I'm doing this other stuff, and I was about to, every time you think you need to write for, reach for like some kind of custom CSS, you probably don't, right? There's probably something, and so like, If Flexbox feels more appropriate for you, go for it. But if you're like, I couldn't use Flexbox because reason, I needed something, so then I had to write you probably don't. Right? It's like most things that I think about with like most libraries or frameworks, which is if you feel that pain, everyone else probably feels that pain, or you're doing something wrong. But if you feel that pain, everyone else feels that pain, and if everyone else feels that pain, there's probably something in the library that does it for you. Or there's also the chance you've gone to a weird place and you need to rethink things. But like generally speaking, that applies. And we're going to play with that card spacing multiple times. We'll take a look at it with the spacing. Later, we'll go and change it to Flexbox. After that, we'll go change it to Grid just for funsies and play along with it all the way and see how all of those apply. So that's kind of our first foray in there as well.